I was sitting in my son's living room when he shoved a stack of papers across the table and said coldly, "Dad, this house is mine now." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That house was the one I built brick by brick with my bare hands, every nail driven after long shifts as a carpenter. To hear him claim it, cut deeper than any hammer blow I'd ever felt. I didn't yell. I didn't fight back right then. I let the silence hang heavy. What Derek didn't know was that I had kept every record, receipts, deeds, and even witnesses from years ago, quietly. I had prepared for this moment, and when the judge saw the forged signature and my proof laid bare, my son's smirk finally vanished. For the first time, he was the one on trial, not me. Do you want to know how a 78-year-old man turned betrayal into justice? Follow my story to the end. Comment the city you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss how this fight for dignity truly ended. The evening began the way so many others had. The smell of roasted chicken drifted from the kitchen, mingling with the faint polish of the old oak table I had built decades earlier with my own hands. Derek's house was modern, larger than the one I lived in alone. Yet there were reminders of me in every corner. My work had shaped more than wood in this family. It had shaped lives. The table felt familiar beneath my fingertips. Each mark carried a memory, tiny scratches from grandchildren's toys, faint burns from hot dishes I once set down without thinking. I sat quietly, taking it all in, around me. Voices overlapped, Derek's steady, Lacey's sharp, the children's laughter flitting like birds in spring. For a brief moment, I let myself believe we were simply a family gathered for dinner. Nothing more. Conversation meandered at first, touching on work, school projects, and the rising cost of groceries. I offered a smile here and there, letting their words wash over me. It was almost warm, almost ordinary, the kind of evening I used to imagine having more often. I thought maybe, just maybe, we were finding our way back to something simple. But then Derek cleared his throat. The room seemed to shift. His hand slid across the table, placing a sealed envelope in front of me. The air thickened. I looked at the envelope, then at him. His eyes did not hold warmth. They carried something colder, harder. I opened it carefully. Inside was a statement, stark and unforgiving, $300,000 of debt, all in Lacey's name. Numbers stretched across the page like chains. Derek's voice cut through the silence, steady but merciless. "Dad, you're going to pay this." The words struck harder than the numbers. A silence heavier than stone pressed down. My chest tightened. This was no request. It was a decree. I stared at the paper, letting the weight of the demand settle in. 300,000. Years of savings, years of sacrifice, turned into a single command laid at my feet. Then Lacey's voice sliced through the air. "You're the one with the money. That's your role now." Her tone was dismissive, stripped of respect. In that instant, something inside me twisted. Memories collided, years of paying for their schooling, fixing their roof, covering bills when jobs fell through. Every sacrifice I made was supposed to mean I was their father, their protector. But here, in this moment, I wasn't a father at all. I was a wallet, an ATM. My jaw tightened as anger stirred beneath the surface. My hands clenched, though I forced them still against my lap. They didn't see the years, the sweat, the sacrifices, only what I could give now. "I can't do this," I said finally, my voice measured. "That's not my debt." Derek's expression hardened further, his voice edged with threat. "Family takes care of family. Don't make this harder than it has to be." A storm rose inside me, a mix of rage and heartbreak. Yet outwardly, I stayed still. There are times when silence holds more power than shouting. I picked up the envelope, folded it slowly, and slid it back across the table. My eyes locked on Derek's. Not wavering. The room stayed frozen. Every breath loud. Every second stretched. I let the silence speak louder than any words could. I folded the envelope, slid it back across the table, and let the silence speak louder than any words I could give that night. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting thin lines across the kitchen table. The envelope sat where I'd left it, unopened again. Its weight heavier than any debt could measure. Coffee steamed in my cup, but even its bitterness couldn't mask the taste of last night's betrayal. My son had slid that envelope across the table like a dealer laying down a hand of cards, expecting me to cover his gamble. For years, I had built everything brick by brick, our house, his future, even the small comforts that kept this family steady. Each nail, each board, each sacrifice carried my name. Yet now, Derek treated me like nothing more than a ledger to be balanced. That house I poured my sweat into. It was more than lumber and shingles. It was memory carved in wood. But to him, it seemed invisible. The ache rose in my chest, steady but quiet. My calloused hands rested on the table, fingers brushing the rough edge of the envelope. For a long moment, the silence felt louder than any outburst could. By mid-morning, I drove into town, hoping a routine errand might clear the fog. The grocery store smelled of coffee grounds and waxed linoleum. Familiar faces nodded my way, and I managed a weak smile. At the counter, I handed over a check for a few simple items. The young cashier, polite but awkward, glanced at the register, then at me. "Sir, I'm sorry, but this one didn't go through." Her words stung sharper than they should have. Behind me, I heard the shuffle of impatient feet, the whisper of neighbors too curious for their own good. My name, the one I had always guarded with dignity, had been dragged into the mud. Derek had signed me into his mess. My son, my own blood, had turned me into a fool in front of my community. I forced a chuckle, pretending it was some clerical mistake. The cashier avoided my eyes. People shifted, murmuring. My throat tightened, but no words came. I simply took the worthless slip of paper, folded it, and walked out with nothing more than a paper bag of shame. The air outside burned colder than it should have. Each step back to the truck echoed like an accusation. In the reflection of the glass, I saw a man who had spent a lifetime paying, giving, and repairing, now mocked as if he had nothing. Inside, a storm brewed. The humiliation cut deeper than money ever could. My son had used my name, the very thing I had built my life upon, and now I wore the shame of being broke when I had saved carefully, lived simply, prepared for old age. That vow came quietly, like a nail driven straight into oak. This won't happen again. My silence won't mean surrender. At home, the check joined the envelope on the kitchen counter. Together, they sat as evident symbols of more than financial burden. They represented respect stolen, trust broken, dignity mocked. I traced the edge of the paper with my finger, then whispered aloud, steady as if speaking a promise only to myself. "You took my name once. Never again." The house felt heavier that evening, shadows stretching long across the floorboards I once laid with care. Silence settled in, not of defeat, but of something forming quiet, deliberate, unyielding. I slid the bad check inside the same envelope, sealing them both. In that act, I sealed something else the moment my silence stopped being weakness and started becoming my weapon. The kitchen was quiet that night, lit only by the dim glow above the sink. I sat at the table, the same one I'd eaten countless meals on with my wife, and stared at the envelope lying in front of me. It hadn't moved since Derek shoved it my way, and yet it felt heavier now, as if it carried not just numbers, but the weight of every sacrifice I had ever made. My eyes drifted from the envelope to the small photograph propped against the wall. It was her smiling, hair pulled back, a flower stain on her blouse from some long ago Thanksgiving. Next to it lay a bundle of letters she once wrote, words I never had the heart to throw away. I picked one up, the paper worn soft from years of being held. Her voice came back to me as I read, "Family isn't about what we take from each other, Russ. It's about what we build together, brick by brick." I could almost hear her laugh, see her nodding in approval as we painted the front porch on that spring day. She believed in the good and people believed in our son. That faith of hers stood in painful contrast to what I faced now. The memory pulled something inside me taut. For years, I worked double shifts, my hands raw and my back screaming, just to keep a roof over our heads. When Derek wanted to go to college, I worked Sundays too, telling myself it would all be worth it when he stood on his own 2 feet. She used to place her hand on mine after a long day and say, "One day he'll understand." But that day never came. Instead, I sat here with an envelope demanding $300, 000, treated like a bank instead of a father. All those bricks I laid, all those nights she waited up with supper cold on the stove, they felt like dust now. The next time I saw them, the air was colder. Derek's voice carried that edge again, the one that cut deeper each time. He slid the envelope across the table, his eyes sharp, as if daring me to refuse. Lacey smirked faintly, confident in the weight of their demand. I held the envelope in my hands, let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then slowly, I opened it and shook out its contents. Nothing. I had already taken out the papers and left them at home. The envelope was empty, hollow, like the respect they showed me. I slid it back toward them with the same calm they mistook for weakness. Their faces faltered. Lacey blinked. Derek shifted in his chair. For once, they had no quick words, no smug remarks. My silence filled the room thicker than any speech I could have given. I didn't linger. I stood, nodded once, and left without a word. Driving home, the dark roads of Asheville stretched ahead of me. My hands gripped the wheel, but in the passenger seat, her letter lay folded neatly, a reminder of what I had once believed and what I still carried. I pressed it against my chest at a stoplight, whispering into the night, "You'll learn who I am, not just your ATM." The anger was no longer wild. It had become something sharper, something steady. Silence wasn't surrender anymore. It was strategy. I left their house that night with nothing in the envelope but everything in my heart, grief, anger, and a plan forming in silence. The call came in the middle of a quiet afternoon. I was sanding down a small wooden stool in the shed when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was polite. Professional too professional. "Mr. Boone, this is Carla from First Community Bank. I just wanted to confirm some details on your loan application before we proceed." I froze. "Loan application?" "Yes, sir. The one filed last week under your name." My hand tightened around the phone, the sandpaper slipping from my grip. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't asked for any loan. The last time I dealt with a bank was to set up a college fund for Derek decades ago. I kept my voice steady. "I'll come down to your office. Don't move forward with a thing until then." The bank smelled of polished wood and coffee too clean, too calm for what I was about to see. Carla, a young loan officer with neat glasses, slid a folder across the desk toward me. Inside sat pages of numbers, terms, conditions, and at the bottom of the application, a signature. My name. Written in a hand that tried to mimic mine but couldn't quite hide itself. The R in Russell leaned at a sharp angle, slanted the way Derek always wrote when he was in a rush. The uneven pressure. Heavier at the start. Lighter toward the end, it screamed of him. My chest tightened. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was theft. This was my son willing to burn down my good name for a pile of borrowed cash. Carla's voice was cautious. Everything correct. Sir, I shut the folder slowly, my heartbeat drumming in my ears. That's not my hand, I said evenly. I'll need a copy of this file. She hesitated, then nodded. Making the copies. I left the bank with the papers tucked under my arm, feeling like I carried both evidence and a gravestone. My wife's voice echoed faintly in my head. Strength isn't in shouting, it's in standing tall. That evening, I drove to Derek's house. My hands gripped the wheel so hard the leather creaked. By the time I walked up the driveway, my jaw was set, my mind already rehearsing what needed to be said. The door opened. Lacey stood there, surprised to see me. Behind her, Derek lounged on the couch. The kids scattered with their tablets. Dad, what are you doing here? Derek's voice was casual, almost smug. I stepped inside, shut the door behind me, and pulled the folded papers from my jacket pocket. My hand didn't tremble. My voice was firm. You signed my name. The room stilled. Lacey's eyes darted between us, wide and nervous. Derek sat up, color draining from his face. What? No. That's not true. Your slanted R, I said, tossing the paper onto the coffee table. The uneven strokes. I've known your handwriting since you were a boy. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise. His denial cracked, and anger rushed in to fill the space. You don't understand. Dad, you've got everything sitting in the bank while we're drowning here. A real father would help instead of hoarding. The children glanced up, alarmed by his raised voice. Lacey bit her lip, saying nothing. I straightened, letting the silence weigh heavy. You stole my name. Derek, that's worse than stealing my money. For the first time in years, I saw him falter under my gaze. His face twisted, half defensive, half ashamed, before rage took over again. If you won't help, you'll regret it, he shouted, standing now, fists clenched at his sides. I didn't shout back. I picked up the forged paper, folded it neatly, and slipped it back into my pocket. Then I walked to the door without another word. Outside, the cool night air hit my face like a slap. His threats still rang in my ears, but the document pressed against my chest spoke louder. It was proof, and proof had power. Morning sunlight crept into my modest home, painting the kitchen walls with a soft glow. The air smelled of old pine and coffee grounds, familiar and steady. But inside, there was no calm. The confrontation from the night before still echoed in my chest, heavy and sharp. I knew this day would not pass like any other. Enough had been taken, and today I had to draw the line. The silence of the house gave space for thoughts to sharpen. Memories of decades working with my hands, wooden beams, brick walls, sweat dripping into sawdust rose alongside the bitter truth all those years had made me into a man my own son now saw only as a walking wallet. That realization burned. And yet, I wasn't going to let anger control me. I had one thing left: no one could take my word. And today, I intended to use it. By the afternoon, I found myself seated at another family gathering, this one at Lacey's urging. She insisted we should talk things through. The living room was dressed to impress, candles flickering. Framed photos lined neatly on the shelves, a scene meant to showcase family unity. But under it all, I knew the cracks. Derek started talking, his voice smooth and rehearsed, like he'd practiced in the mirror. He painted himself as the dutiful son, struggling under pressure, while I, his own father, was stubborn, paranoid, even cruel. Every word dripped with manipulation. Faces around the room shifted. Some nodded. Some looked uncertain. The performance was working. I let him finish. Then I leaned forward, resting my calloused hands on my knees. My voice stayed calm, but firm, like the strike of a hammer against steel. I am not your ATM, and I won't let you sign my name again. The silence that followed was heavier than any outburst could have been. That was the moment the line was drawn. The shift was instant. Derek's mask cracked. His face flushed red as he slammed his palm against the table. You're trying to ruin this family's image. You want everyone to believe I'm some kind of thief. Lacey leaned close to him. Her voice dripping with venom meant only for me. Maybe you should just stay away. If you can't support us. Maybe it's better if the kids don't see this side of you. There it was, the twist I'd expected. Derek wasn't going to fight fair. He wasn't just asking for money anymore. He was trying to erase me from the family, twisting the story until I became the villain. I could almost hear the words already spreading. Dad's losing it. He's not himself. Don't listen to him. For the first time in years, I felt not sorrow, but defiance rise inside me. They wanted to strip me of respect, of my place in this family. But I had carried too much, sacrificed too deeply, to be pushed aside like that. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I stood slowly, letting the chair scrape against the floor. My silence made them more nervous than if I had yelled. Their eyes followed me as I moved toward the door. At the threshold, I turned back. If you believe his lies, you'll regret it when the truth comes out. The words came out steady, not as a threat, but as a promise. Then I closed their door behind me, the sound ringing like the final nail driven into oak. The evening air felt colder than usual, but in that chill, my resolve grew hotter. This wasn't the end of their schemes. No, this was only the beginning of my fight. The phone rang before sunrise, its sharp tone slicing through the quiet of my small kitchen. I reached for it, expecting a neighbor or maybe a wrong number. Instead, it was Mr. Green, the bank manager I'd known for nearly 20 years. His voice was clipped, almost apologetic. Russell, I thought you should know we caught something unusual on your account. An attempted transfer for $50,000. For a moment, the words didn't register. Then the weight of them landed like a hammer. 50,000. My account. My son. The pit in my stomach told me exactly whose hands were behind this. Derek had already stolen my name once with forged papers, but now he was clawing into my life directly, trying to take what I had worked my whole life to save. It wasn't just money. It was a violation, a betrayal so deep it rattled my bones. To think the boy I raised with these hands, the same hands that built his childhood home, that fixed his cars, that carried him when he was too tired to walk, would sink so low. I thanked Mr. Green in the calmest tone I could muster and hung up, though my insides roared like a storm. By mid-morning, I was sitting across from the same manager in his office. The documents lay spread before me, black ink scrawled with numbers, my personal information twisted into a tool for theft. Green slid them over carefully, like they might explode. Russell, we stopped it in time. The account is safe for now, but you need to understand this wasn't a mistake. Someone had access to details only you would know. I stared at the paper, at the false trail Derek had tried to create. My heart thudded slow and hard. I could see his handwriting in the request, the little tilt of the R, the uneven stroke on the T. No one else would notice, but I did. The bank promised to monitor my accounts, to freeze suspicious activity. I nodded, thanked them, folded the papers, and tucked them into my coat pocket. My face stayed calm, but inside I was burning. Fury pressed against my ribs, begging to spill out. But I'd learned shouting wouldn't save me. Silence and planning would. I sat in my truck afterward, the engine idling low. My wife's face came to me unbidden, her warm eyes, her soft hand against mine. She used to tell me, don't fight blindly. Russ, fight smart. That's how you win. Those words hit me harder than the morning's shock. This wasn't a fight I could keep stumbling through. If Derek wanted war, I'd have to fight with more than anger, instead of heading home. I turned the truck toward downtown, I parked outside a brick building with gold letters etched on the glass law offices of Carter and Hale. For the first time in this whole nightmare, I was walking into a place where my silence could become a weapon sharper than Derek's schemes. The receptionist barely had time to ask before I laid the envelope and the bank papers on a desk inside a private office. The lawyer, a calm man with silver glasses, leaned back as he studied them. "You've been smart to keep everything. This," he tapped the forged transfer, "isn't just fraud. It's a pattern." The advice was simple but clear. Stay quiet. Gather proof. Let them build their own noose. If you confront him now, he'll cover his tracks. If you wait, he'll give you everything you need. Walking out of that office into the cold evening, I felt something new, lighter, steadier, stronger. For weeks I had been the man absorbing blows, staying silent out of shock and sorrow. Not anymore. The papers in my pocket weren't just protection. They were my first weapons. As I stepped into the dim light of the street, I muttered under my breath, "They think I'm weak. They'll see." I walked out of that law office with more than papers. I walked out with a plan. Saturday morning arrived with a heaviness I couldn't quite name. The neighborhood in Asheville, once a comfort of familiar faces and small talk, suddenly felt colder. Folks I'd known for years were on their porches, sipping coffee. Yet when I waved, eyes darted away. I could hear a whisper or two carried on the breeze, words clipped short when I drew closer. Mrs. Daly, who'd lived across the street for decades, shuffled over with her newspaper. She leaned closer than usual and whispered, "Russell, I don't know how to say this, but Derek's been talking. He says you're not well, that you're forgetting things." Her pitying eyes cut deeper than any knife. Forgetting things. That was his story. I smiled politely, thanked her, and walked back toward my house. But inside my chest burned. My son wasn't content with stealing money. He was stealing my name, my mind, my dignity. Later that day, I went to Derek's cookout. He'd invited half the family and a handful of neighbors, claiming it was about bringing us all together. The smell of burgers on the grill, children laughing on the lawn. It should have been a pleasant sight. Instead, it felt staged, like a performance with me as the unwilling star. Cousins and in-laws drifted toward me, their voices soft, too soft. "You holding up okay? Russell, must be hard living by yourself these days." Someone else asked if I'd thought about moving in with Derek just for safety. Their words weren't kindness. They were pity, born of lies. I could see Derek in the corner, laughing, his hand on Lacey's back as though nothing in the world could touch him. That smirk of his was the same one I'd seen when he was a boy, caught lying but too proud to admit it. Inside, rage coiled tight. He wasn't just trying to take my money anymore. He was trying to erase me. Sunday morning, I sought refuge in church. The sanctuary had always been a place where I could breathe, where my late wife's memory felt closest. The hymns echoed off the walls, steady and strong, and for a moment I let myself feel at peace. After service, Pastor Green, an old friend, a man who'd counseled me through my wife's passing, took me aside. His hand rested heavy on my shoulder. "Russell, if you ever need help, please don't be too proud to ask. Your son told me you've been slipping, forgetting things." The words hollowed me out. Even here, in God's house, Derek's lies had followed me. A flush of heat rushed up my neck, but I swallowed it down, managing only a nod. I couldn't bring myself to argue. What would it matter to them? I was already a broken old man whose mind was slipping away. As I walked out into the sunlight, my chest felt hollow, as if every pair of eyes lingered just a moment too long. On the drive home, the steering wheel creaked under the pressure of my grip. The lawyer's voice replayed in my mind, "Let them stack lies. Truth will cut deeper. Every whisper, Every sideways glance, they were bricks my son was laying, building a false wall around me. But walls can crumble, and when they did, I'd be standing. I spoke into the empty cab of my truck, steady and low. They think they've isolated me, but all they've done is build my case. The road stretched out before me, and for the first time that weekend, my fury wasn't consuming, it was controlled, sharpened into resolve. The living room at Lacey's house felt more like a courtroom than a home that night. Lamps cast long shadows against beige walls, and the air was thick with tension before a word had been spoken. Derek stood near the mantel, posture rigid, like a man ready to deliver a verdict. Around him sat siblings, in-laws, cousins, even the children faces drawn tight with expectation. I sat in the corner of the couch, hands folded, saying nothing. It wasn't silence of weakness, but silence that carried weight. Derek's voice cut through the room like a knife. He painted himself as the dutiful son, the victim of an aging father's stubbornness. He claimed my paranoia had grown, that I was hurting the family with suspicion and wild accusations. I watched heads nod, saw relatives shift uncomfortably. I let him build his story brick by brick, lies stacked like a crooked wall bound to collapse. Inside, the ache of betrayal pressed down, but outwardly I stayed calm, remembering my late wife's words, "Truth doesn't scream, it waits." Then he laid out papers, false documents, so carefully arranged meant to make me look irresponsible, forgetful, incapable. The murmurs around me deepened. For a moment, I felt the old pull to defend myself, to shout back, to plead. Instead, I stayed still, eyes resting on Derek, heart steady. The storm was gathering, and I had waited long enough to let it break. When I finally rose, the room shifted. Every gaze locked on me. My movements were slow, deliberate, the way a carpenter measures a cut he knows will change everything. From my jacket pocket, I slid out the copy of Derek's forged signature and the papers from the bank detailing his attempted transfer. I placed them gently on the coffee table where all could see. My voice was firm, each word like a hammer strike. These are Derek's lies, not mine. Gasps rippled through the room. Siblings exchanged uneasy glances. In-laws leaned forward, eyes darting between me and Derek. He stammered, face flushed, denial sputtering out of him like steam from a cracked pipe. Lacey reached for his arm, whispering, but the papers on the table glared louder than either of them could speak. The cracks in his facade had finally split open. Derek erupted then, voice raised, accusations wild and desperate. "He's twisting everything. You're all blind if you believe him," his words echoed. But the weight of the evidence held him down. For the first time, the room wasn't looking at me as the man on trial. Their eyes shifted, slowly, one by one, to Derek. I steadied myself, grief and anger woven into strength, and spoke the final line I had prepared in silence. "You wanted a family tribunal, well, here is your judgment." I left the papers on the table. The room stayed hushed as I stepped back. The gavel struck without sound, but heavy with truth. The house felt too quiet that night. After the tribunal, I came home and sat in my armchair, staring at the papers that had finally stripped the mask off Derek. The silence from the family replayed in my mind the way their eyes darted from me to him, the uneasy shifting in their seats. For years, I had been treated as if my voice was a relic of the past, something to dismiss. Yet when I laid those forged papers down, the room turned heavy with a truth no one could deny. Still, sitting there alone, the taste in my mouth wasn't victory. It was bitterness. Sleep didn't come easy. My body was drained, but my mind ran restless, remembering every sneer, every word tossed at me over the past months. Proof had cleared my name, but it didn't erase the sting of betrayal. By morning, the sunlight poured into the kitchen, warm and steady, but my chest carried a weight no light could ease. The knock on my door startled me mid-coffee. When I opened it, I saw Janice, my daughter-in-law. Her eyes looked softer than they had in months, her voice quieter. "I came to say I'm sorry," she murmured, her hands twisting together. "I believed Derek when he said you were slipping." Her words broke off, swallowed by shame. I let her in, though part of me wanted to shut the door. She spoke about trust, about how convincing Derek had sounded, how easy it was to follow along. "We should have stood by you," she admitted, eyes glistening. Later that afternoon, my brother Calvin stopped by. He avoided my eyes at first, but finally confessed. "I doubted you too. Thought maybe grief had clouded your judgment. But last night, seeing those papers, hearing Derek stumble, I realized I'd been blind. They wanted me to feel relieved, perhaps even vindicated. But all I felt was hollow. My own blood, my own kin, had turned against me until the truth slapped them awake. Their apologies were words I never should have needed. That evening, I sat out on the porch, the sun dipping low, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gray. In my hand, I held one of Clara's old letters. Her handwriting, neat and looping, reminded me of evenings when she'd sit at the kitchen table, telling me to never give up on the family. I read her words again, but they hurt now. She had believed love was enough to hold us all together. She couldn't have imagined this, our son carving at his father's dignity like it was nothing. A cold truth settled in: winning against your own son isn't winning at all. The evidence may have spoken, but it didn't heal the wound of betrayal. My heart ached with something deeper than anger. It was grief for the family we once were, the family Clara thought we'd always be. Sunday morning, I went to church as usual. People greeted me differently this time: warm nods, handshakes, the kind of looks that said, "We were wrong about you." Respect returned, but it felt too late. Pastor Green gave me a long nod from the pulpit, one that carried understanding. Still, as the choir sang and voices lifted around me, I felt more alone than ever. Midway through the service, I slipped out the side door. The autumn sun hit my face, sharp and clear. For the first time in weeks, the air felt crisp, free of lies. But then my phone buzzed in my pocket. The screen showed an unknown number. I froze, thumb hovering above the call. Something deep inside told me this wasn't over. The truth had cracked Derek's image, but it hadn't finished the fight. That call could drag us all into a new battlefield, one with law, judgment, and consequences no one could escape. The phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, its sharp vibration rattling against the wood. For a moment, I thought about letting it ring itself into silence. After everything, what good could another call bring me? But something in me said to answer. "Mr. Boone," a steady voice asked when I picked up. "My name is James Callahan. I'm an attorney here in Asheville. I think we need to meet." The way he spoke, calm, direct, cut through my suspicion. My first instinct was to hang up. Lawyers meant trouble, and trouble was already breathing down my neck. Still, the tone carried weight, as if this wasn't a solicitation but a lifeline. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. The diner was nearly empty when I arrived, the kind of place with faded red booths and the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. Callahan was already seated, a thin briefcase propped against his chair. He stood to shake my hand, firm and professional. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Boone," he said. "I have something you need to see." He slid a folder across the table. My stomach tightened even before I opened it. Inside were copies of documents, property transfers, deed adjustments, signatures I didn't recognize. Or maybe I did. Derek's touch was all over them. Clumsy attempts at passing as me. He had been moving assets, shifting titles, as if I were already out of the picture. The breath caught in my chest. Betrayal wasn't new, but the depth of this one nearly hollowed me out, even after the family meeting, after the truth burned a hole in his facade. My son hadn't stopped. He had doubled down. Callahan watched me silently, letting the weight of the papers sink in. "Mr. Boone," he said after a pause, "this is only the beginning. Derek's preparing to challenge you in court. He's building a case that you're unfit to manage your own affairs." His words landed harder than the papers. "Unfit," I repeated, my voice low. Callahan nodded. "He'll claim diminished capacity due to age. If he succeeds, the court could strip you of your authority over your own finances, your property, everything. That's why we need to move fast." For a moment, I sat frozen, staring at the greasy tabletop. My own son, the boy I raised with my hands, those same hands that built his first crib, fixed his first car, paid his tuition, was now trying to erase me. Not just my money, not just my name, but my dignity. Heat rose in my chest, but I forced it down. I wouldn't give Derek the satisfaction of seeing me rattled, even in absentia. "Let him try," I muttered, sliding the folder back. "He's not the only one who knows how to fight." The drive home stretched long, headlights carving tunnels through the darkness. My thoughts churned every sacrifice. Every hour I bent over wood and nails to give my children a foundation. Every moment of quiet endurance after my wife passed. All of it was now being twisted into an argument that I was too old, too broken, too irrelevant. When I pulled into my driveway, the house stood in silence. The same house built brick by brick, board by board, with sweat that had long dried into its beams. It wasn't just walls, it was my testament, and I wasn't about to let Derek steal it out from under me. I climbed into the attic, dust swirling in the glow of a single bulb. There, tucked in the corner, was a worn box filled with decades of records deeds, receipts, letters my wife had kept, all the proof of a life lived with intention. I rested my hand on the box. Derek wanted war. So be it. They think age makes me weak. I whispered into the empty air. But I'm just getting started. The boxes were heavier than I remembered. Dust clung to my hands as I pried them open and spread their contents across the dining room table. The papers smelled of old ink and time receipts from lumber yards, mortgage stubs with my name scrawled in faded ink, yellowing letters my wife used to keep neatly folded in the corners. Each piece was proof, not just of transactions, but of sweat, calloused hands, and nights spent carving a future for my family. My eyes lingered on a faded ledger from the year I bought this house. The numbers were simple, but told a story every brick, every plank paid for with overtime shifts and blistered palms. Pride stirred, yet it was shadowed by the ache of betrayal. How could something built on so much sacrifice now be the battlefield where my own son sought to erase me? I shifted the papers, flipping carefully through brittle pages, when something odd caught my eye. A property deed tucked in the pile. At first glance, the signature looked like mine, but the curve of the R slanted awkwardly. The pressure on the pen dragged uneven, shaky in ways I never wrote. My stomach tightened. This wasn't my hand. The room seemed to shrink as the realization set in. Derek hadn't just started stealing, he'd been planting these seeds years ago. This forgery wasn't clumsy. It was calculated, designed to blend in until the right moment. My son, my own blood, had stolen my name long before I even knew to guard it. I gripped the paper until my knuckles whitened. Betrayal deepened, not as a sudden blow, but as a cold, crawling truth he had been chiseling away at my trust for years while I was too busy believing in him. I dialed Callahan's number with trembling hands. When his voice came through, steady as always, I forced mine to match. I found something. I said, "A deed, signed with my name, but it isn't mine." A pause on the other end. Then, "That's strong. Russell, very strong. But be careful. He'll argue you signed it and forgot. Age will be their weapon, not just the paper. The words stung worse than the forgery. I leaned back in my chair, the receiver pressed against my ear. To have my memory questioned was more terrifying than losing money or land. If they could convince the world, I couldn't even trust my own mind. Then who was I? They can strip my pockets, I whispered. Half to Callahan, half to myself. But I won't let them strip my name or my memory. When I hung up, the weight of the papers felt heavier than ever. I sat alone in the dim light, the silence thick, until a sharp knock jolted me from my thoughts. For a moment, my heart lurched. I expected Derek, maybe even another confrontation. But when I opened the door, it was Elaine, my late wife's cousin. Her face, aged but kind, softened as she stepped into the hall light. "Russell," she said gently, "I should have come sooner. I was there, you know, years back, when Derek shoved those papers in front of you. I saw the way he cornered you. You didn't sign that deed by choice." I blinked at her, words failing. All this time I'd carried the weight alone, and here was someone who had seen, who remembered. She reached into her bag, pulling out her own notes, scraps of memory she'd held onto, perhaps not knowing when they would matter. In that moment, the loneliness that had wrapped itself around me for months loosened just enough. For the first time in years, I wasn't fighting in the dark. I wasn't alone. The truth had been buried, but not forgotten, and now it had a voice besides mine. The county courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and polished marble, a mix of history and judgment. Walking through those heavy double doors with Callahan at my side and Elaine just behind me, I felt the years of sacrifice weighing on my shoulders. Every plank I had hammered, every paycheck I had stretched thin, every quiet night spent alone since my wife passed, it all led here. Derek stood across the aisle with his lawyer, looking smug, like he had already won. I sat down slowly, steadying my breath. They thought 70 years made me frail, easy to push aside. But age hadn't weakened me, it had hardened me. This wasn't just about a house. It was about my name, my dignity, and the life I had built brick by brick. The judge called the session to order. Derek's lawyer rose first, parading stacks of documents across the bench. He spoke in a practiced, oily voice. "Your Honor, these papers prove beyond doubt that my client, Derek Boone, is the rightful owner of the property in question. His father willingly transferred ownership." I watched Derek lean back with a grin, chest puffed, as though victory was certain. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt, family in the benches behind us watching, whispers buzzing, my heart pounded. But I stayed silent. Callahan tapped the table twice, our signal patience. When the judge turned to us, Callahan stood calmly. "Your Honor, we respectfully request that these signatures be examined." Two handwriting experts stepped forward. They laid Derek's so-called evidence side by side with genuine documents I had signed decades ago, receipts for lumber, legal papers, my old mortgage. The experts explained the differences, the slanted R's, the uneven pressure, the deliberate attempt to mimic an older man's hand. I saw Derek's face falter, the grin melting into confusion, then panic. His lawyer tried to object, but the judge raised a hand. Silence fell heavier than any gavel. The truth had spoken. Elaine rose next. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "I was there years ago. Your Honor, I saw Derek pressuring Russell to sign papers he didn't understand. I warned him, but he trusted his son. That trust was betrayed." Gasps filled the room. Family who once doubted me shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Derek's mask cracked completely now, anger flushing his face, lips curling as he tried to shout over her testimony. But it was too late. His lies had unraveled. The judge's eyes bore into him. "Mr. Boone, forgery is not only a crime, it is a profound betrayal of trust. This court will not tolerate it. I stood then, not for the judge, not even for the record, but for my son. Looking straight at him, I said, "You tried to erase me, Derek, but I built this life with my own hands. You'll never take it." My voice didn't shake. It carried years of grief, but also unbreakable strength. The verdict came swiftly, the house restored legally to me. Derek facing criminal charges, his reputation in tatters. When the gavel finally struck, I felt a release, not joy, not triumph, but vindication. Justice had been served, not by shouting, but by standing tall. Outside the courthouse, the air felt brighter. Elaine walked beside me, Callahan close behind. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel entirely alone. As we reached the steps, I paused, looking up at the sky. Remembering my wife, she would have smiled at this moment, proud that the truth had not been buried. I thought of all the elders who might hear my story, who had been dismissed, used, or betrayed by their own kin. I wanted them to know we elders are not burdens. We are the roots. Greed may shake the branches, but the tree stands because of us. I may be 70, but I proved that dignity has no expiration date. As we walked away, people whispered not about me, but about Derek. His greed had undone him. His lies had finally collapsed under the weight of truth. And as I took each step, cane in hand, head held high, one thought burned clear. I didn't just win my house back, I won back the truth of who I am. And that victory will outlive every lie.